Let us begin. It's 3 p.m. sharp, so let's get it going, guys.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the very first Gutierrez Group webinar. We are very happy to have you joining us this afternoon. My name is Wendy Hillwater, and I am a U.S. expat. I've been living in Colombia almost 5 years, and the wonderful people at Gutierrez Group asked me if I would just introduce this first webinar. So it's a topic I know about, of course. I've been through all this myself, and I'm honored to be here to welcome you to our very first webinar. So our topic today is all you need to know about visas and residency in Colombia. Today you're going to hear from Juan Darío Gutiérrez, who is the Chief Legal Officer of Gutierrez Group. He is an expert on this topic, and he has helped more than 1,800 international clients maneuver this system and go through this process. He is going to explain to you today the process and how many options there are for residency in Colombia. And at the end of his short presentation, he's going to answer all of your questions. So please feel free to be asking questions as we go along, and then at the end we'll let you know to submit your questions and make sure we get as many answered as possible. Plus, be sure to stick around to the very, very end today, because we are having a drawing for one lucky participant who is still listening at the end, and we're going to choose by random number a winner of the raffle, and they are going to receive a free consultation with Juan Darío, as well as once you start your application process to become a resident in Colombia, Gutierrez Group is generously going to pay your application fee. So stick around to the end. It's worth waiting for, and you're going to learn a whole lot today, I'm sure. So I'm going to turn it over to Juan Darío and let him explain everything you need to know about residency here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wendy.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have quite a bit of ground to cover. We're going to do a little bit of substance before we start with the Q&As. You're going to see below that there's an actual Q&A button. I'll basically ask you all to click on that and submit your questions as we are going through the subjects through the Q&A methodology, as opposed to the chat, because the chat is just it doesn't allow us to keep track of every other question that you submit. And let's get it going. We're going to basically do the following here. We're going to cover some ground by going through the visa options that you already know about, and going through the actual process of getting residency in Colombia. So this is what we're going to do today. The overview is basically the actual visas, which we're going to review, the process, the costs, and some basic and yet quite important pieces of information about how to obtain residency in Colombia. And then we're going to jump to the Q&A. Let's get it going with a very brief explanation of the categories. As you'll see, there are around 17 of them of visas that this country offers. We're not going to obviously focus on them all. We're just going to touch on the most popular picks, and those are going to be the following. Okay, first, migrant visas. Migrant visas are also called temporary visas. You might recall that temporary visas have multiple criteria for you to qualify. Basically, the most popular ones are going to be the pension visa, the rentista visa, and the investor visa. As you can see, the criteria for each of those options are going to be having a pension of $800, having a monthly yield of $2,600, or having investments in the country for $26,000 if you have a company, or $91,000 if you have real estate. These investments, and very important to be advised and be aware of this, these are investments that only the applicant has to do. These are a pension threshold or a monthly yield rentista threshold that only the applicant for the visa has to actually comply with. If there are beneficiaries within the application, they don't have to comply with the actual thresholds once again or all over again. You can basically extend the same type of visa to them by your sole application. Going forward, we are going to touch on the permanent visas. You might recall from the actual newsletter that there are two types of visas. We have the migrant visas, and then we have the permanent visas. Migrant visas we just touched on, and they're also called temporary ones because their term is 3 years, as opposed to the permanent visas, which we refer to also as resident visas. These are 5 years, and there are three main criteria why you can apply to them. The first one is an investment. Basically, if you invest in Colombia, 170,000 US, that qualifies you for this type of visa, regardless of what you do, if it's an actual real estate operation or an investment in a company. And then you have permanent visas for those who have held migrant visas or temporary visas for long enough. Specifically, if you've held a migrant visa for 5 continuous years, you're then eligible for a permanent visa. But also, if that migrant visa is the kind of a spouse one, we didn't touch on the spouse ones just before, but if this is specifically is your case, you only have to wait for 2 years to pump it up, to upgrade it for a permanent visa. This is a little table to compare the two visas that we're talking about, at least in what pertains to the investment-driven alternatives. As you can see, the term is different, there being 2 more years in a permanent visa. But more importantly than that, permanent visas qualify for citizenship. It's not only about the term that's more extent, it's also the fact that you're going to qualify for citizenship. Second, the criteria, as you can see, to qualify in terms of the thresholds to invest, a lot more money to invest if you're doing the permanent visa, but also there's actually no threshold distinction between the real estate and the corporate matter, so you can actually mix them up a little bit. And then the minimum stay is very important. You have to understand that if you are the beneficiary of a migrant visa or the holder of a migrant visa, then your minimum stay requirement is going to be 1 day every 180 days. That basically means that you can't stay away from the country for more than 6 consecutive months. If you basically look on the permanent visa side, this is a much ampler term. We're talking about 1 visit every 2 years, meaning you can't stay outside of the country for 2 consecutive years. So it's if you're planning on actually retiring in the country, what you'll get is that's going to be a very easy thing to comply with, but you still want to keep this in mind, because not visiting within 1 day, within those 180 days in case of the migrant, or those 2 years in case of the permanent, will get your visa revoked. And I think this is possibly the one matter in which we received more questions. So we're gonna extend a little bit ourselves in this slide. This basically touches with the application requirements, folks. The application requirements, as you'll see, are in essence 4, but there are multiple forms and multiple pieces of supporting documentation that, depending on the case, you might need to provide. So let's just go one by one, okay? The application forms are going to be the customary forms that our immigration system has assigned. We're basically talking about the visa, personal ID forms, and 3 other forms that are just basic information that the government requires from you as to basically understand who you are and why are you applying for the visa. Then we have the solicited letter, which reinforces that actual claim of yours, and it needs to very much make the claim or be very explicit about the actual fundament of your application. So this is a letter that doesn't necessarily have an actual ritual to be written. It can be quite ample or quite simple, depends on what you style to do, or what the actual law office that you're working with decides to perform. But normally we like to make these solicited letters as colorful as they can be, basically, because this is the one chance that you have to basically explain yourself to the actual authority, which is going to be basically a person, and he doesn't know anything about you. So you want to make sure that you include information there that accounts for who you are and what you're pursuing, your plans, and obviously the actual type of visa that you qualify for. This is a very important letter. It's the basis of your application. The next thing is a photograph. You have to take a specific pictures. I don't know why authorities are quite demanding in this aspect, but it needs to be a 3x4 white background colored picture. They don't like it when it's different. I've never understood that, but that's just the way it is. So we simply comply. And then the actual most important piece of information is going to be the supporting documentation. And supporting documentation is exactly the piece of paperwork that is basing your application. So it's going to differ depending on the path that you are pursuing. If we are talking about a pension visa, for instance, well, this is going to be your pension certificate. If we're talking about an investment-driven visa, specifically a permanent visa, that you basically are applying to because you invested in real estate, then obviously what we're talking about here is the actual deed of the property. Or if what you're doing is something else, say a spouse visa, then of course the marriage certificate is what you're looking at here. Supporting documentation has one very important aspect to consider, which is this is the one document that requires formalization. So if you need to contribute a certificate abroad, the certificate can't just be the piece of paper that you pull from the internet or something that some authority hands over to you. It needs to have an actual signature. It needs to be either apostilled or it needs to be authenticated upon a Colombian consulate. And those two things generate often quite a lot of confusion. So you just have to remind yourselves that the formalization of a document for the document to be valid in Colombia requires that an apostille is placed on it or an actual notary seal of a Colombian embassy or consulate is also placed there. These are alternatives that that are exclusive, if you will. You don't have to do them both. You can just do one or the other. The apostille is going to be something you can easily obtain at the local Secretary of State of the state in which the document that you are contributing has been issued. Whereas the authentication part has to flow through the nearest Colombian consulate or embassy to your location. Further guidance in that regard obviously is available upon request, and we're more than happy to actually extend some more information in that regard, because even though it seems simple, sometimes things aren't as simple when you actually face the authorities and they explain things a little different. But that's basically what you have to keep in mind there. Lastly, before we engage in Q&A, this is what you're talking about in terms of process and costs here for any type of visa, regardless of its actual nature. Once we have the documentation in hand, what we need to do is apply. And apply is sending the actual package of information, the dossier if you need, going directly to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website with the actual request from our office or whatever other office you're using. And then the process starts. The process of analysis and approval of your visa starts. And it basically elapses throughout an 8-day period. That's the average of the applications. The term is not very long, as you can see. If anything, it's quite efficient. If you compare that to other jurisdictions, there are parts in the world and not so distant from us. We're talking about neighbors and obviously very appealing countries from all over the world as well. They take months or several weeks to process visas. There's countries that, of course, take years. We take 8 days. This is a very efficient country in terms of the expediteness with which these applications are processed. And then the final part, once you've been approved, is to register your visa. And there's also been questions about what is it that the registration implies. The registration is an obligation that you have to present yourself upon a different authority, in this case, not the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that is the authority that issues the visas, but the local immigration authority. That particular obligation is complied with very simply by visiting that authority upon your next entrance to the country, or even better, your first entrance to the country, for which you have 15 days. So if your visa was issued abroad, meaning you were abroad while the visa was issued, next entrance to Colombia, first entrance to Colombia, you have 15 days to show up upon this authority and simply show them your visa. They will trigger the actual delivery of cédula, which is a local ID card. If your visa was actually issued while you were in the country, while you were in Colombia, then what you have is 15 days from the day that the visa was actually delivered to you to go ahead and visit this immigration authority. The cédula is a very important document. The cédula is not equal to the visa. There was another question in that regard. So it's important that you distinguish between the visa, which is your residency permit. It's what allows you to be in Colombia throughout the term that you've been authorized to do so, and the cédula, which is just a plastic ID card that you have to carry while in Colombia, and that allows you to leave your passport at home so that you may conduct all sorts of business or ID type of diligences with this plastic as opposed to the passport. And then your costs are going to be the following. If you're applying for a temporary visa or a migrant visa, which is the same, $330 US, those are the governmental costs. And the permanent one is a slightly higher, it's $500. Those are just one-time fees when you actually request your visa. And professional fees will differ from attorney to attorney, which are $750 US for those of you who already done processes with us. You know that that's from scratch to here's your visa. Basically, we do it all. And we even coordinate your appointment at the Consulate of Colombia, in which you are going to show up to have your visa stamped in your passport. So your only task is, at least with us, simply providing the documentation and showing up at the consulate to pick up your visa. That's pretty much it. If you have questions, this is now the time for you to start drafting them, and we'll go ahead and tackle them. Before you do that, I'll just remind you all that we've been in this business for pretty much 10 years now. We've helped close to 2,000 clients accomplish all their needs and goals in Colombia. And that's our webpage that you're going to see there on the bottom of your screen. So make sure to log in and surf through it, because there's a ton of information there, and it's very much full of content that you might benefit from. And without further ado, we are going to now jump to Q&As. Let me just stop sharing this screen. I think it's here. There we go. All right. So let's quickly shift to the Q&A. All right. I see one question here from David. Are the costs for a couple the same or doubled? Good question. The costs are just for one party. So if you are applying for, let's say, a pension visa, and you are the one within the couple that complies with the threshold of the $800 pension, then it's only you who must provide the application payment, and not your couple. Your couple can apply as a beneficiary, and as a beneficiary, she doesn't need to provide anything other than just her own application forms, and she also has, or he also has, to pay for the governmental fee. I hope that that's not what you were referring to when you said costs. The costs are going to be, the governmental costs are going to be per application, but she doesn't have to actually comply with the criteria that the visa stands for. Okay. We have another one. How do you check into the country to prove your 180-day or 2-year visits? David, how do you check into the country to prove? Basically, that's for you to track. You have to be very diligent with being in the country every 180 days or every 2 years. There's a way in which the country tracks that, which is upon entrance. When you enter, there's normally an immigrations officer that is reviewing everybody's passport and basically makes an inscription which within the system that you've actually arrived. Roy is asking, how does Colombia tax income earned outside of Colombia? That's obviously a little bit off the subject here, and we are going to respond to all questions, but those that are not related with the topic that we're touching today, we're going to respond privately. Same thing for those questions that are too specific and require a little bit more personalization. So Roy will answer you via email. Beth, she's saying that if I invest in a corporation for a migrant visa, what is Colombian income tax if we invest as individuals or if we invest as an LLC? Same thing as Roy above, Beth. We'll answer you via email so that we can basically cover some immigration doubts and some grounds here. All right. We have Tom asking, I have a 5-year resident visa. Great for you, Tom. Your website showing this type of visa doesn't expire unless you fail to visit the country once every 2 years, correct? On the visas itself, the expiration date, August 22. Do I need to renew my visas upon the expiration date, August 22? That question is a good one because it opens up the opportunity to speak about something which is permanent visas are in fact 5 years in the sense that you have a sticker that says that there is an expiration date. That sticker has to be renewed before it expires. In order to do so, you have to actually visit the country and within those 2 years, otherwise you won't be able to actually have your visa valid. But the actual renewal is very simple and pretty much follows the same idea as the application itself. It's almost like if you were applying all over again, but knowing that you already have the qualifying criteria. Okay, so we have a couple of questions on the chat. Let's try to use a Q&A format, but I'll still go ahead and try to resolve those for you. So Claudia is asking, an American retired must invest money here or just his visa like a retiree? It's a good question. If you are considering to retire here and you have an actual pension, you don't have to invest because there is a criteria that you may qualify to, which is the pension criteria. As long as that pension is at least $800 per month, that allows you to qualify for a pension visa without having to invest. There we go. Mark is asking the following. My temporary visa expires in 2022. However, I will have held it 5 years in 2020. Do I need to wait until the visa expires before I can apply for residency? Good one, Mark. You actually don't need to wait. you can apply for your upgrade to a permanent visa in 2022. You have a longer term because temporary visas are for 3 years, and you only need 5 of them to apply for an upgrade. So you actually don't need to wait all the way to 2022. You can start the process possibly a month before the 2020 expiration date. They don't like it when you initiate processes too early, too much in advance. So 1 month is what we usually recommend everybody to initiate the process in terms of anticipation. All right, do we have some more questions? I see people raising hands. I see James, Thomas, David raising hands. I'm not sure if that's because you have a question or because they're raised since the beginning of the webinar. But let me know if there are questions and I'll tackle them. Claudia, I see that you're putting the same question here. So I think that's already replied to. Mark, another Mark. I will be visiting for the first time in 3 weeks. It is beneficial for me to obtain an immigrant visa before I go there. I have invested in timber with your company. All right. That's great, Mark. So I think it could be in your benefit. So here's the thing about collecting a visa or applying for a visa. If you want to make that happen because you qualified, a visa, residency in general is insurance, if you will. Basically, it's the ability to go to another country for a permanent period of time or a very large period of time without having to actually require any further authorization. So if you want to trigger that before you arrive to the country, great for you. That's actually what I would recommend. So yeah, plus the fact that you apply for a visa also starts the clock ticking regarding your future application for citizenship if you were interested in that. For you to apply to citizenship, you must first hold a permanent visa. But then again, if you have a temporary visa for 5 consecutive years, you will soon enough qualify for an upgrade to a permanent visa. So there's really no downside in getting the actual process started with a temporary visa. So I would say go for it. Plus, you already qualify if you invested in our timber project. So pretty much it's the whole idea of having the timber project qualify people is for people to take advantage and apply for their visas. All right, Roy. A letter from the USA Social Security showing monthly needs what kind of notarization? That's a great question, Roy. We do a lot of pension visas, possibly dealt around 300 or 350 of them. So I'll tell you what, the Social Security certificate needs to first be a signed certificate. You can't just pull the certificate that I'm sure you're able to collect from the internet. You actually have to go to the local the Social Security office and get your certificate signed. That signature will allow you to go to the Secretary of State and get that apostille, or you don't need them both. The second would be go to the Colombian consulate that's nearest to your location and get that authenticated. That's the type of notary seal that you require, authentication, all right? Just one of the two. You don't need both of them. All right, Tom here. Tom is asking, I currently hold a 5-year resident visa and have been visiting Colombia for a couple years now, but never really applied for a cedula. Would this cause any problems with my visa renewal upon 5 years? I don't think it's going to cause problems with your visa renewal because the fundament of your visa is that you made an investment. But as in any other country, authorities are not super thrilled for procedures not to be followed. So what's going to possibly happen here, Tom, is that you're going to show up upon your next visit to the country and present yourself at the local immigration authority, and you're going to just tell them what happened. You know, I just totally forgot about this, and we need to sort it out. And what they'll do is they'll impose a fine. So we have a lot of experience with immigration offices. We've been dealing with them for pretty much 10 years, so they know us for the good and the bad. So that's both very positive and not so positive, because we fight for our clients very harshly when they're abused, and obviously they're our opponents, but we're also extremely diligent in putting together very, very consistent, very solid, very complete applications. So they love it, because it's always good when your work is made easier by the parties that you're dealing with, when everything is in order. We'll show up with you if you want us there, and paint a case that's very simple and say, listen, this just happened, so please treat this person well. At the end of the day, he's investing here, he is possibly employing people, or just allowing the economy to enhance further, so you don't need to fine him very, very severely. That's what's going to happen. Darren, he asks, just because I have a visa, do I have to file taxes in Colombia? Good question. No, you don't have to file taxes in Colombia just by having a visa. That's a good question, because it allows us to explain to you that if you are in Colombia and have a permanent visa that doesn't convert you in a fiscal resident, staying in Colombia more than 180 days converts you in a fiscal resident. And being a fiscal resident does obligate you to file taxes in Colombia. Not necessarily to pay, two different things, but it does obligate you to file. Another thing that might obligate you to file is if you are collecting income in Colombia. Those are obviously subjects that are a little more technical now, and obviously different from what we're discussing, but we will soon enough have a webinar on both citizenship, and then of course taxes, in which we'll clarify all your doubts in those regards. I see another question here by eDesign. When will you have another webinar concerning any of the following: taxes, investments, national health plan? Good. So I just said that we're gonna soon have a webinar on taxes, not necessarily in investments, but we'll put that in our schedule so we can cover it hopefully before the end of the year. We'll have another one in citizenship, which is something that comes up very, very often. And obviously everybody that's pursuing a permanent visa is gonna have within that time frame that aspiration or opportunity to file for citizenship. So we're going to cover those two things before the end of the year, and we'll make sure to put something together on investments and national health plan. That might be something that we can actually respond to you or consult with you via email. It's extremely specific. All right. Thank you, Beth. I just saw your comment on the chat. That's very kind of you. Okay. And then I see, could you explain me again something that you say about cedula for Americans? I'll explain it once again very gladly. Cedulas are different from visas. To have a visa is to have a residency permit, and it's basically the sticker that you get, you're stamped in your passport, versus a cedula, which is, if you will, it's basically the visa's daughter, right? When you have a visa, then you have the obligation to collect a cedula, but you will receive the cedula, which is your local ID card. It's a local ID card. You'll be able to take it wherever you want and make your life easier. You can open a bank account with it. You can basically leave your passport at home, not need to worry about losing it somewhere in the street, and just hold your cedula to ID yourself for whatever, whenever required. All right, so that's 35 minutes, and we actually said we were going to present this over a 30-minute time frame. So I think that's pretty much nail that. And the idea for these webinars are to make it fast and easy. We want to answer all your questions, make sure that you have concise information, but also valuable content that allow you to make decisions very, very precisely. So in terms of immigration, this is the basic that you need to be aware of. As you pretty much discovered throughout this webinar, it's a fast process, it's an efficient process, it's not an expensive process. It's quite easy to achieve when you have the right consultants by your side. This is something that can be done on your own. Don't get me wrong, if you're up to the task, filing for a Colombian visa is something that many people have done by themselves. It's just a matter of studying and being very punctual and very, very, very precise with information. But if you'd like somebody to hold your hands and make sure that nothing goes wrong and the application goes through like it should be and you get your visa, just exactly that, we've helped hundreds of others obtain theirs. We're here, glad to help you, and more than excited to make that goal of yours be complied with. I do see another question that I just tackled them before we ended up. And I'll mention two more things just in a second. Darren, some people say that you can apply for a visa on your own. Do you really? Oh, well, there we go. We just answered that. So thank you, Darren. And then Tom is saying, on my Colombian visa, it doesn't show what type of visas I got since it has 5 years duration. Can I assume that it's a permanent visa? It is a permanent visa, Tom. It should say, it's just that the language with which it's said, it's a matter of actual codes. They don't necessarily say permanent visa, or at least they didn't back then. It's a code. It would say R or it would say P, but it should be there. Also, I have another question here that was sent via email prior to the webinar, and it basically asked about the need for FBI reports and medical exams to apply for visas in Colombia. I'm glad to report that those are not required. Not to mention that they're sometimes harsh to collect or inconvenient for some people, but those are not required in Colombia, so you can skip those. And I think there was another question which might have been resolved. Can't find it here, but anyway, that's pretty much it for the topic. We're gonna go now and switch to the actual raffle. So it's gonna be very simple, and Wendy's gonna be helping us here with the dynamic. We are going to leave it to her.
First, I want to remind everybody that if there's any questions that didn't get answered, please submit them either through this webinar or on the Gutierrez Group website, and they will be certain to answer all your questions. So what we're going to do to give away the wonderful prize of the free consultation and application fee, you were all assigned a number when you joined the webinar today. So we have a random number generator and all this fancy technology you've got now. And we're going to make that run. Yeah. Okay. So.
All right, we're going to run the number. It's going to run.
Tick, tick, tick,
and
tick, tick.
There we go.
Oh.
The result is.
There we go. See if I can show it here. Can you see that? No.
A little bit.
Can you get, yeah, we've got a little screen blocking us here. There we go. Maybe I can, there we go. Okay.
Just put it back a little bit.
It's too much light.
That's the number. Number 8. Number 8 is right here.
Sorry. There you go. Number 8.
Number 8. So we're just going to see who is participant number 8. And that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. E-Design Consultant. E-Design Consultant at, all right. So we are going to contact you, and you're going to be basically receiving an email from us asking for your specific plans, and we're going to be ready to help you with the consultation. And if you decide to pursue residency in Colombia, we'll basically cover or waive all our fees to you who are the lucky winner. So congrats to you. And basically congrats to everybody also for attending here. We're gonna hope to see you in very soon in another webinar.
And we hope that you've learned everything you need to know, at least in general, about visas and residency in Colombia. The Gutierrez Group is here for all of your legal needs and your personal needs, investment needs, and basically anything they can do is in the form of a concierge as well. They'll walk you through this process and attend to all your legal needs. And basically they are your family office here in Colombia. And I'm sure you would agree, Juan Darío, that any questions you may have, any needs you may have, please reach out to the Gutierrez Group and they're here for you. So until next time.
Until next time. Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks.